Today, you've got an incredible guest. I've heard a lot of great things about him, and I'm really anxious to meet him and discuss what's going on today with really one of the greatest legal minds in the country. And his name is none other than Ron Coleman, and he's with us now. Welcome to the Joe Hoft Show, Ron.
Joe, thank you so much for having me on. It's nice to meet you after all these years. We have been proceeding on parallel tracks on the internet and going back to the
Yeah.
blogging days since I think the Eisenhower administration.
Yeah, that's right. I think it was on like rock tablets or something like that, but we did what we could. Yeah, hey, it's such an honor having you here. I actually talked to a friend of mine because I was thinking, I think she brought your name up before, Pamela Geller. I talked to her this morning. She says you are a good man, by the way. So,
Pam, yeah,
great girl.
Pam and I worked together, and also an old school blogger and a great American. Very nice of you to mention that. I'm on the way. Actually, it is not my way to do interviews from the car, but I'm on my way back from, I don't know how many counties I visited over the last 2 weeks in Pennsylvania for this nonsense vanity recount on behalf of the McCormick campaign. But finally, it's over, and I can go home and return to and my normal law practice. So, excuse
Wow.
me for the Jeep background.
No problem. No problem. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for helping out in that effort. I'm curious, just from what you saw over the past few weeks, what's your impression of the election process in Pennsylvania, let alone the recount?
Well, one thing I learned is just how much variation there is from county to county. People should understand that just as everything in this country can be divided into what's going on in red districts and blue districts, the same thing is true with voter integrity. Most of Pennsylvania, just like most of every other state in the union, is red, meaning Republican, of course. It's the blue counties. Philadelphia's, the Buckses, the Luzernes, where the trouble is. I was dispatched to some sleepy places in northern and northeastern and northwestern Pennsylvania where McCormick won handily. But the main thing that I observed was that they had processes in place that were extremely transparent. There was no effort whatsoever to restrain anyone from observing them as close up as he wanted to. The people working in the boards, Republican and Democrat alike, were and are patriotic Americans dedicated to fair play, there to do their jobs. And the only global observation I have in terms of problems is that it is a little bit ridiculous to spend millions of dollars and delay final election results by weeks in order to go from county to county and find 50 or 100 votes that were scanned improperly because dumbbells can't follow instructions to fill in an oval and instead make an X. I think we could go back to living in a world in which if you don't follow the instructions on how to vote and the scanner can't pick up your vote, you blew it. You lost it.
Yeah.
Because that's all that was accomplished by this recount.
Wow.
Now that is different from saying that's all that was intended to be accomplished, because cynic that I am, but also as we both are familiar with the fine work of Mark Elias, who has done so much to bring our profession into disrepute, it is pretty clear to me that what this was about was an attempt to slow roll the final count so that he could try his hand at finding judges and courts and commissioners who would do the right thing for him and his party. That's obviously what he hires himself out to do. And thank God this time it didn't work.
It may have been. I wonder if it's because he needed more than Pennsylvania. He could fight Pennsylvania, especially in the Trump case. Uh, but yeah, I guess. But what you were focused on was the Senate race. One thing that you
Well,
shared there, though. Yeah, go ahead.
it does
No, go ahead.
appear that the only reason we got past them this time was, well, there are two reasons. One is, yes, too big to rig, but the other one is there's no question, and I've seen it. I was there up close in 2020, and I've been there in 2024, a little bit less close. We were much better prepared. We were much better organized. Chairman Watley, compared to Ronna McDaniel, day and night, we were ready, and we got the job done. The lawyers were ready, we were prepared, and the election officials were ready. And they ran out of tricks. We pretty much knew what the tricks were. They ran out of them, and this goes statewide. I mean, nationwide.
Mm, mm. Yeah, that's good. I was thinking about, I've had a guest on our show a few times from Italy, and she talked about the election there. And you go in one day, you bring your little it looks like a passport. They stamp that. You give them your ID. They check, make sure you're on the voter roll. You go vote, paper ballot. You drop it in a bin. Then you leave, get your passbook back and your voter ID. And she's made this comment: if you're not there that day, sorry, that's it. It's one day only, unless you're military. No exception. If you want to go to Monte Carlo, she says, that's fine, but you're not going to be able to vote then because you've got to be there in person to vote. And I like that attitude. We bend over backwards to allow people to vote. And the problem with that, I'm sure you would concur, is that then they use our niceties, I guess, to take advantage of us. And that seems to be a big problem in our election process.
It's a problem. It's a problem. And one of the amazing things that by the grace of God, we have both houses of Congress and the White House. This is the opportunity for election reform, for meaningful and thorough federal-wide election reform, which the Constitution does explicitly permit. And it's a reform that there can be no principled objection to. National ID, back to one day of elections, the kind of stuff that was intended by the founders when they set an election day. This is all doable, and there's no excuse to not get it done.
Mm. What do you think of the machines, per your experience here and before?
The fact of the matter is, I can't speak to the issue of internet manipulation of tabulation, which seems to be an unresolved problem. And the owner of this channel is far more knowledgeable about it than I'll ever be. But I am actually a believer that, again, I think it's actually an excess of precision that we have. But the machines are amazing. When done properly and conscientiously, they're slow is the problem. And again, the difference between the result you get with these machines, where every single transaction, every single vote, every single would-be manipulation, every data event is recorded, is traceable, it's graphically scanned, the data is scanned, it's checkable. I believe that it can be done, but it's sort of like the story of the guy who was hired to be an engineer, and the CEO or a vice president called him into his office and said, I need a block of wood that is 0.2500 inches. So the guy went to the machine shop, and that's a very high tolerance. It's 1/10, 10,000ths of an inch. Had it done, took several days. They measured it. They brought it into the vice president's office. Guy was very grateful. He picked up the edge of his desk, which was a quarter of an inch too low, and shoved it under the desk. Okay, that's what we have with these elections, which with going back and finding trivial amounts of data, and again, people who are not following instructions. Very, very few elections can and should be this close. It's almost never going to matter. And as a matter of policy, why do you why do you want to encourage people not to follow instructions? So the machines can absolutely be done right. But if there's a way to do it the way Florida does it, where it's finished in a day. No, to be fair, Florida is now a reliably red state. The Delta there isn't as close as it has been in other elections. So I understand. But you can definitely see the advantage here over anonymous ballots, old style machine ballots. I had a friend who has been working in Republican politics for his entire adult life. He remembers going into a voting to be a voter observer in Philadelphia, and he noticed that people were streaming into a townhouse across the street from the precinct where he was supposed to observe. He followed the trail of people, and there was an election machine down there that was just, it was like a mimeograph machine. They were just chunking out Democrat votes. Boom, boom, boom. Infinite numbers of votes, whatever was needed. That should not and cannot happen with the kind of sophisticated machines where you can actually tell voter by voter who has voted. There should be no votes that are not attributable to an actual voter. But why should we be doing mail-in votes? That's ridiculous. Why should we be doing, 2 weeks of voting, postmarked after the postmark? It's not the way any engineer, to use that metaphor again, whatever, design an effective system.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's the chain of custody and the mail-ins and the systems seem to be real challenges still. And I really do believe I believe it was a lot of hard work by a lot of people, like you mentioned, preparing for this election, and especially on the Republican side, and a lot of citizens that saw what happened in 2020 are like, we're not going to let that happen again. And then you had one great candidate that we've never seen the likes of before, and with a heck of a lot of momentum. And then I think God's grace at the end of the day. I was mentioning this to Pam earlier. I talked to a guy I know this past week, and he said, well, when that bullet missed Trump, we all knew that there's something special about this guy, and we need him as president. And immediately Elon Musk saw it and came out and said, hey, this is the guy I want as president. Somebody that's going to say, fight, fight, fight. And all of a sudden, there's an army of new people charging behind Trump, epitomized, I think, on Saturday night's fight, the John Jones fight at UFC, where Trump marches in with Elon and Kid Rock and his sons and Bobby Kennedy Jr. This triumphant march, and then John Jones even jumps on and says, "I'm proud to be an American athlete. I'm proud to be American champion and a Christian champion." So it was for me. It was like, that's when I finally accepted that Trump won this election. I've been waiting. I wrote 3 books on 2020, and I've been waiting for the water main break. And finally, it's right. Finally we could, celebrate. By the way, our friend Pam, she's very happy about Trump winning.
I'm sure she is.
Yeah.
I'll tell you one more thing that God provided us with in this election, with adversaries who can't stop themselves from being as bad as they are. If they would have merely put up an acceptable, moderate Democratic candidate, if they would just back off from their most extreme positions that are so offensive to the vast majority of Americans, they would have had a real shot here. But they can't. They can't, because there's no limiting principle to the depths of their moral reprobatedness. They can't say no to anything, because they don't admit of any absolutes, don't admit of anything except there's no enemy ever to the left. So they made it a lot easier for us than it might have otherwise been.
That's a great point. That's a great point. Speaking about that, I don't know if you noticed today, this Judge Merchan in New York comes out and allows President Trump's team to I guess, file a motion to dismiss that case. What did you hear about that? Are you?
I
What do
did.
you have to say about it? Yeah.
Well, actually, I should have mentioned Judge Marchand is another gift from God. The lawfare that you were talking about before I came on is really a very large part of how we got here. It's another example of the depths to which the Democrats would proceed. They really thought they had this nailed. And there are many, many people who realize that if the system was fighting so hard against Trump, that there must be something worth looking into here. The lawfare against him changed no votes except in the direction of Trump. Now, this idea that the Attorney General of New York would keep a case pending for the entire pendency of the Trump presidency is ridiculous. It is entirely contrary to the concept of presidential immunity to say that we do not prosecute a president while he's in office, but we will maintain an open criminal case against him just so he knows that we will drop the hammer when he leaves office. It basically is an invitation to indict presidents, to indict political rivals before every election, and then keep claims open. Not to mention, of course, that I mean, these are such patently legally unsustainable and constitutionally offensive claims. So my main hope here is that the appellate courts in New York, which are political, like most appellate courts in New York, maybe more so than many, but where they still have a little bit of motivation to maintain a modicum of respect in the world for their court system, that this dismissal, or that however it ends up being resolved at the trial court level of the Supreme Court, doesn't deprive Donald Trump of the opportunity to be cleared on the merits, because he deserves it.
I agree. I agree 1,000%. I am so appalled by this case from the start. And my background, by the way, Ron, is in corporate audit and corporate finance. And I landed in Hong Kong for 10 years, actually, as an executive there. I really know finance. And when I saw these crimes against Trump, where they're trying to say that he made all these accounting entries and then they tie him to something else to make him felonies, and the statute of limitation expired years ago, and these entries totaled like 200,000. So some of them could have been for $5. And we don't know. We still don't know the answer to that. That the president made these entries, which I worked in a large corporation overseeing $1 billion block of business at one point, $2 billion actually. I never made an entry into the books as
Of
the
course
head of
not.
that operation. And to suggest that President Trump did, which this whole case to me was built upon, was insanity. I just looked at it over. There's nothing here that's legit. So I'm so glad you said that there's no legitimacy to this case in the first place.
But also, as a litigator and I've done some commercial litigation involving real estate claims, and anyone familiar with with real estate financing knows, forget commercial real estate. This is true of residential real estate also. You get the best possible valuation for your property that you can.
Right.
And you leave it to the bank's underwriters to come up with, to examine the appraisal, to examine whatever assets are put on the balance sheet as collateral, or or for purposes of evaluating creditworthiness. Then they do their due diligence. That what you as a lawyer were involved in. You do your due diligence, and then the bank makes a commercial decision. And one of the things we all know is that banks routinely lend money on terms that they know are not exactly what their underwriters think they are. In other words, The bank officers are rewarded and compensated to make loans, not to deny loans. And they know that there's lots of salesmanship on the part of borrowers seeking financing. They make a judgment call. Am I ultimately going to get, is the bank going to get paid on this or not?
Mm.
Answer, yes. So they in turn have to sell it to their underwriters. And that's how the loan is made. There's nothing criminal whatsoever about that process. But heaven help the borrower who, for reasons that either could have been anticipated or could not have been anticipated based on the balance sheet, based on the underwriting, based on the appraisal, who defaults on a loan, all of a sudden, those banks become very, very particular about federal disclosure requirements. It's problematic, but it's the game you play in real estate. The idea, however, that you should be second guessed by the by a an attorney general of the state on a political or personal basis. I mean, this has not done much for the New York real estate business. The fact that you had Governor Hochul meeting with real estate executives to say, listen, don't worry about this. We won't do this to you.
Yeah.
The mere fact that she said that demonstrates that she has and arrogates to herself the right to decide who shall be victimized by law enforcement in New York. That's not going to give confidence to anyone who is considering investing there.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. The ramifications of this stuff, there's going to be ramifications for a long time till they get rid of these people that are running these various departments and courts and quite frankly, I've met a number of people that have had to face some of these courts in New York City. Steve Bannon now, they're bringing him back, is my understanding, for this Build the Wall project that they did nothing wrong. And as if any of these people in New York City give a damn about a wall on a southern border. And yet they went after Bannon and actually a really good guy who I've had the opportunity to meet, Brian Kolfage, who was a war victim. He lost 2 legs and an arm in Iraq, a hero, goes on to help Bannon build a southern wall cheaper than the government could do it, probably times 100. And they get prosecuted in New York, and then Bannon gets pardoned. Kolfage doesn't. Kolfage is sitting in a prison now for some made up charges in New York. And they're bringing Bannon back now, is my understanding, related to basically the same case.
It's a travesty.
It's horrible.
And there are so many ways they can get anyone they want to, certainly at the federal level, but also states like New York, which are basically every bit as regulated. I represented charities that have had to answer for their activities before trade, regulatory authorities. And it's this incredible amount of arbitrariness and capriciousness built into the system. And one of the things, we saw with the last Supreme Court term, the end of Chevron deference. Hopefully that begins to have a real effect throughout the federal constitutional and litigation system. And maybe it will even have an effect on how state courts interpret the capacity of regulators to criminalize all kinds of conduct that really shouldn't probably be regulated at all. I don't mean charities shouldn't be regulated. They should be. But it's ridiculous how many licenses a person has to get to do all the most fundamental kinds of, commercial activity in so many places. There's a lot of work to be done here.
Yeah, to say the least. To say the least. You practice law in New York State, right? Have you seen
Yes.
Would you be able to comment on the ethics, your perception of how the law is being handled over the years, decades that you've worked? Is it?
It's gotten worse. New York has always been a place where lying to courts by lawyers has been tolerated broadly. That is for my entire career. I have noticed, and especially comparing notes. I mean, most of my work is, well, a lot of it's in New York. A good amount of it is in New Jersey and other parts of the country. Even in New Jersey, just separated by the Hudson River, lawyers are astonished at the extent of dishonesty that is accepted in the New York courts. But the corruption. I mean, look, there has been stories about corruption in the New York courts go back to probably the British even took New Amsterdam over. I mean, it is an old tradition. There's a lot of money at stake. So many New York institutions are built on graft and have been for the longest time. Everyone should read The Power Broker just to get a taste of that. But there used to be a sense that the New York State courts, especially at the Court of Appeals level, which is the highest court in New York, held of itself as a leading court in the country, a leading commercial and business and civil rights court. And what has happened is that the Marxian trend has politicized everything and everywhere. And I quit the New York City Bar Association when they came out in favor of Judge Sullivan's judicial prosecution of General Flynn. I just couldn't believe it. How could a group of lawyers possibly recognize that as an ethical or constitutionally acceptable manner in which to treat a criminal defendant? It was mind-boggling to me. So I do think there has been a real meaningful decline in the 35 years that I've been admitted to the New York bar.
Mm. Yeah, we've had General Flynn on here, and I remember watching and even listening in to Sidney Powell right after that court case, maybe even during that court case with Judge Sullivan, where he's asking her questions. He said, "Well, there's no precedent for this. This has never happened before," and he's bringing in his own representative for the judge. It appeared to be. Everybody's like, "What is going on here?" And it was all to keep. To me, it's been it's an effort. I'd almost say to torture, to torment people, your political, those that you don't like, basically. And Flynn, Rudy Giuliani, Jim and I have faced some big cases,
Yes, I was thinking about it, yes.
for defamation. Pamela Geller, you just if you're not on that team, you're a target.
It is a disaster. What they've done to Rudy Giuliani is criminal. It's criminal, and I've been saying on social media for the last 4 or 5 years, of all the incidents, I expect the legislatures to be political, inherently political. Executives are also elected, and although their agencies are supposed to be professional, that they're going to be political, but historically we have expected that the judiciary, especially at the higher levels, will be a fail-safe. And there's been such a failure on that part of the judiciary. During COVID, a massive failure. During the 2020 elections, a massive failure. The Judge Flynn stuff, everything coming out of the D.C. circuit, that circuit should be abolished. And the D.C. court, district court should be made part of the Fourth Circuit, or I don't care, any damn circuit. But there's no reason for a single city to have its own court of appeals. The one that has become so utterly politicized. And this is all stuff that Congress can do. Hopefully they will.
I'm so happy to hear that. I couldn't agree with you more. And it takes some real courage for you to even say that these days. But DC, I'd feel like if I ever get brought in front of that court, what do you do? What do you do? You don't have I'm not going to get a fair stroke. And Jim and I, quite frankly, before this election, we were saying, if they win, where do we go? Where do we go? Because it's only getting worse. What's next? And it really was a miracle. And our friend Pamela said something today to me. She says, he's legend, Trump. He's legend. And I've said
Yeah,
his stories are going to be, they're going to be around for 1,000 years. They're going to be talking about some of this stuff, dodging the bullet, beating Hillary, the attempted coup of his first administration, Russia collusion.
an
We're
incredible
in a,
story.
it is
It's
historic.
you know, I'm certain you and I are old enough to have been through a lot of campaigns over a lot of years. Nothing in our lifetimes, nothing in our cultural, life. In other words, guys like us, we can we remember, even though we weren't born yet, Truman and Eisenhower, because our parents talked about it, and all, nothing like this. This is just
Mm.
this kind of political comeback in any kind of political system, and not only the politics of it, but to have every institution in society aligned against you, and to come out winning like this, and with a mandate like this, and to have the two houses of the legislature, including the one that ends up controlling the future of the Supreme Court. My God, was I worried about this. All I'm
Mm.
really thinking about during this whole election is I can really tolerate almost all of this unless she gets to name Supreme Court justice. Because remember, it doesn't matter whether it's Kamala or Joe. These people have not been president. The president is
Yeah.
some cabal. I don't really know,
Yeah, right. We don't know.
who's really pulling this. It doesn't matter. But the
Yeah.
Supreme Court has not enough, but has come through. This is everything.
Amen. Ron, how can people follow you and where can they go?
Well, of course, everyone already does follow me, but be careful, because sometimes they disconnect us. Best place to go is on X. Look for Ron Coleman. It's with an E, RonColeman. And there you find out every little thing I'm doing. It's almost a little bit too much. If you want to go to a website and understand what I do professionally, and also familiarize yourself with the Ron Coleman podcast, which I do not as often as you do here, roncoleman.com. Same name, same spelling.com. Thanks so much for having me on.
Thank you so much. It's been an honor. Thank you. Thanks for all your work too in Pennsylvania and in the entire country. Really appreciate everything. God bless.
Have a
Have a
great
great
weekend.
Thanksgiving. Thank you. We'll be back as soon as possible here on the Joe Hoft Show to keep bringing you the truth. Happy Thanksgiving, and thanks for listening in.